I came to the bank to close my old account, but the manager went pale and said, "Ma'am, have you seen your balance?" It was $55 million. I had never seen that kind of money in my life. When I asked, "Good day, dear listeners. It's Maria again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video. And also, let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Claire Henderson, and for 22 years I believed I had a good life. I had a colonial house with white shutters in Naperville, Illinois, a golden retriever named Biscuit, and a husband who came home every evening smelling of expensive cologne and business dinners I was never invited to. I had raised our 2 children, Emma and Jake, through every school play, every broken bone, every college application. I had volunteered at the library on Tuesday mornings, grown tomatoes in the backyard, and told myself that the quiet hum of a comfortable marriage was enough. It was enough. It had to be enough. Daniel Henderson was 51 years old, sharp-jawed and precise in the way that men who build empires from spreadsheets tend to be. He'd started Henderson Development Group in his late 20s, commercial real estate mostly, and by the time we were in our 40s, the company had projects in 6 states. I was proud of him. I was proud of us. That was my first mistake, confusing his success with ours. Looking back now, the warning signs were everywhere, scattered like breadcrumbs I simply refused to follow. There was the Tuesday in 2018 when I found a second cell phone in the glove box of his car, a prepaid phone with no contacts saved, and a screen that required a PIN I didn't know. He told me it was for a confidential deal, that his attorney had advised it for legal insulation purposes. I believed him. There was the evening in 2019 when I overheard him on the back porch, his voice low and careful. "Rachel will handle the transfers. Just make sure the account information goes to her, not the main office." I asked him about it over dinner. He said Rachel Voss, his CFO, was managing a sensitive acquisition. I nodded and passed the salad. There were the quarterly financial statements he kept in a locked desk drawer. Not unusual for a businessman, I told myself. Not unusual at all. And then there was the divorce. In March 2021, Daniel told me, calmly and without drama, that he wanted to end our marriage. He said we had grown apart. He used the phrase mutual incompatibility as though he had rehearsed it, which I later understood he had. Within a week, he had already retained one of Chicago's most expensive family law attorneys. I hired a decent lawyer from a mid-sized firm downtown, a woman named Patricia Hale, who wore sensible shoes and seemed competent. During the proceedings, Daniel submitted his financial disclosures, a 47-page document detailing the company holdings, personal accounts, retirement funds, and investment portfolios. He declared his net worth at approximately $4.3 million. We agreed on a settlement. I received the house, valued at $890,000, and a lump sum of $210,000. He kept the business. Patricia told me it was a fair outcome given the complexity of his corporate structure. The divorce was finalized in November 2022. I signed the papers on a gray Thursday morning and drove home in silence. I told myself I was fine, and for a year and 3 months, I almost believed it. I had found a part-time job at an interior design firm, something to fill the hours that used to be filled with being a wife. Emma was in her 2nd year at Northwestern. Jake was working in Austin. Biscuit still slept at the foot of my bed. I had learned to cook for one. These were the small coordinates of my new life, and I clung to them. It was the last week of February 2024 when I went to First Midwest Bank on Jefferson Avenue to close the old savings account. It was a joint account Daniel and I had opened in 1998, back when we were young and hopeful and trying to build something together. During the divorce proceedings, that account had appeared on the financial disclosures. Balance listed as $2,400. Neither attorney had flagged it as significant. I had simply forgotten about it, and now, going through the last of our paperwork, I decided it was time to close it properly, collect whatever pennies remained, and put that final piece of my old life to rest. The branch manager's name was Mr. Patterson, a trim, careful man in his early 60s with silver cufflinks and reading glasses he kept pushing up his nose. I handed him my ID, the account number, and explained what I needed. He typed something, looked at the screen, and went very still. Then the color left his face. He looked at me the way people look at someone standing at the edge of something they don't realize is there. He cleared his throat once, quietly, like a man buying time. "Mrs. Henderson," he said, and his voice had dropped to something almost reverent. "Before we proceed, have you recently reviewed this account?" "No," I said. "I haven't looked at it in years. There should be a couple $1,000, maybe less." He turned the monitor very slightly toward me. I leaned in, and then I saw the number. $55,241,807.43. The room didn't spin. My hands didn't shake. I just sat there looking at that number and felt something ancient and cold move through me. The exact sensation, I imagine, of recognizing that the life you thought you understood was a careful construction built on someone else's lies. "Ma'am," Mr. Patterson said softly, "did you see your balance?" I had seen it, and I had never seen anything like it in my life. I did not cry in Mr. Patterson's office. I think that surprised him. He had a box of tissues ready on the corner of his desk, positioned with the practiced efficiency of someone who manages people's worst moments for a living. But I didn't need them. What I felt in that moment wasn't grief. It wasn't even anger yet. It was something colder and more focused, like the moment a blurry photograph snaps suddenly into sharp detail and you realize you've been looking at the wrong thing all along. "Can you tell me when these funds were deposited?" I asked. My voice was steady. I was proud of that later. Mr. Patterson typed carefully. The primary deposit, $49 million, was wired into this account in September 2021. There were 3 subsequent transfers in 2021 and 2022, totaling approximately $6 million more. The most recent transaction was in April 2022. He looked at me over his glasses. The account has been dormant since then. September 2021. I did the math without wanting to. Daniel had filed for divorce in March 2021. His financial disclosures, the ones listing this account at $2,400, had been submitted in July 2021. The $49 million wire had arrived 2 months later in September, which meant that when he submitted those disclosures, the account had indeed held only $2,400. He had moved the money in afterward, deliberately, carefully, in full knowledge of what he was doing. "I'd like to leave the account as it is for now," I told Mr. Patterson. "Don't close anything. Don't move anything. And please, is there a way to flag this account so that no transactions can be processed without my written authorization?" He blinked. "You can place a hold on outgoing transfers, yes. Given the amount, I'd recommend speaking with our branch director and possibly our legal compliance department. Please schedule that for tomorrow," I said. "I'll be back." I drove home on autopilot. The February sky was white and featureless, the kind of sky that gives nothing away. I remember thinking, he did it deliberately. He moved the money after filing. He knew exactly what he was doing. And I remember thinking, Patricia never caught it. I never caught it. We all just accepted his 47 pages and moved on. In my kitchen, I made a pot of coffee I didn't drink. I sat at the table with a yellow legal pad and a pen, and I started writing. On the left side of the page, I wrote what I had received in the divorce settlement. The house, $890,000 estimated value. The lump sum, $210,000. Total, approximately $1.1 million. Against that, I had taken on the mortgage, $340,000 remaining. So in real terms, closer to $760,000. Plus my half of a joint retirement account we had split, $88,000. Grand total, not quite $850,000. On the right side of the page, I wrote what Daniel had declared, $4.3 million in net assets. His business, his personal accounts, his pension, his investment portfolio. He had walked away with roughly $3.5 million by the terms of our agreement, plus a business he valued at just over $1 million on paper. But the business, Henderson Development Group, had brokered a $49 million transaction in September 2021, and that money had gone to an account he had listed at $2,400 on his sworn financial disclosures. I stared at both columns for a long time. Hiding assets during divorce proceedings is fraud. Submitting false financial disclosures to a court is perjury. These were not opinions. They were legal facts, and I was calm enough in that moment to understand the difference between the two. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a clerical error. This was a man who had looked at his marriage, looked at his wife, and decided she was not worth the inconvenience of honesty. The question was what to do about it. My first instinct, and I'm glad I overrode it, was to call Daniel, to demand an explanation, to scream at him the way a human being absolutely has the right to scream when she discovers the magnitude of what's been done to her. But I pressed that instinct down hard because I somehow knew with absolute clarity that the moment Daniel Henderson learned I had been to that bank, whatever advantage I held would vanish. He would move the money. He would find explanations. He would call his attorney before I finished dialing. So I didn't call Daniel. I didn't call Emma or Jake. I didn't call my best friend Susan, who would have driven over with wine and sympathy and the very best intentions and absolutely no ability to keep a secret. I sat alone in my kitchen with my yellow legal pad and I made my plan. Step 1, protect the account. I had already done that. Step 2, find a new attorney. Not Patricia. Someone who specialized in exactly this. Financial fraud in divorce cases, hidden assets, forensic accounting. Step 3, tell no one. Not one person. Not until I had legal representation firmly in place. Step 4, gather everything I still had access to. Our old tax returns, the business financial statements Daniel had given me copies of during the marriage, any emails or documents that might help establish a timeline. I went upstairs to my home office and pulled a banker's box from the closet shelf, the one I had labeled Divorce Keep and not opened since 2022. I set it on my desk. I put on reading glasses, and I started at the beginning. The anxiety was there, humming underneath everything like a low current. But underneath the anxiety was something else, something I hadn't felt in 2 years of quiet, diminished living. It was purpose. It was outrage with a direction. It was the bone-deep certainty that I was not going to let this go. Not this time. Not for anything. The next morning, I called in sick to the design firm, the first time I had done that in 14 months, and spent 3 hours at my kitchen table with a legal notepad and my laptop, searching for attorneys who specialized in post-divorce financial fraud and hidden asset litigation in Illinois. I wasn't looking for someone sympathetic. I was looking for someone lethal. Her name was Margaret Olson, and she appeared in 4 different legal directories under the same recurring phrase, aggressive recovery of concealed marital assets. She had a firm on Michigan Avenue, 11 years of family litigation experience, and a client testimonial that read, in part, Margaret got back what my ex-husband spent 4 years hiding. I would not have believed it was possible. I believed it. I called her office at 9:03 a.m. and had an appointment for the following afternoon. The Olson Law Group occupied the 14th floor of a glass building 2 blocks from Millennium Park. Margaret herself was 55, compact, and wore her gray hair in a blunt cut that suggested she had no patience for ornament. She had a handshake like a closing argument. I laid everything on the table. The account, the balance, the dates of the wire transfers versus the dates of Daniel's financial disclosures, the settlement I had accepted, the valuation of his business. Margaret listened without interrupting. She took notes on a yellow legal pad, the same kind I'd used the night before, and when I finished, she set her pen down and looked at me with the particular expression of a professional who has heard something genuinely useful. Mrs. Henderson, she said, what you're describing is fraud upon the court. If the timeline is what you say it is, your ex-husband submitted materially false financial disclosures during a legal proceeding. That's perjury. The settlement you signed was obtained through fraud, which means it can be vacated. Illinois has no statute of limitations on fraud upon the court. She paused. The $55 million in that account, was it there before the divorce was finalized? The last deposit was April 2022, I said. The divorce was finalized in November 2022. She nodded slowly. So at least a portion of those funds was present in a jointly titled account at the time of finalization, and he did not disclose it. Correct. Then we have grounds. She folded her hands. Before we file anything, I want to bring in a forensic accountant, a man named Tom Briggs. He's the best in Illinois for tracing business cash flow through corporate structures. I want to know where that $49 million came from, where Daniel planned to move it, and whether there are other accounts we don't know about yet. She paused. There usually are. I retained Margaret that afternoon for a $15,000 retainer, drawn from the $210,000 settlement I had not fully spent, and left her office feeling, for the first time in 2 years, like someone was standing in my corner who knew how to fight. What I didn't know, couldn't have known, was that 20 miles away, in the executive offices of Henderson Development Group on the 42nd floor of a downtown tower, something had already shifted. Daniel's assistant, a young woman named Brienne, had called Rachel Voss that Tuesday morning with a routine question. She needed a statement from First Midwest Bank for a quarterly audit. Standard procedure. Rachel had requested the statement electronically, as she always did, but the bank's system, in processing the request, had generated an automatic notification to all account holders, including me at my email address, which Daniel had apparently never bothered to remove. The email arrived in my inbox at 11:47 a.m., a routine balance notification. I almost deleted it before I realized what it was, but Rachel had seen the request go through, and she was smart enough to recognize that routine statements from a dormant account nobody was supposed to remember could mean only one thing: Someone was looking. She called Daniel at noon. I don't know exactly what was said. But that same afternoon, Tom Briggs, who had already begun pulling publicly available business filings on Henderson Development Group at Margaret's request, noticed something. 2 of Daniel's LLCs had updated their registered agent information within the past 48 hours. A small move, the kind of quiet administrative adjustment that means nothing on its own and everything in context. Tom called Margaret. Margaret called me. "He's starting to move things," Tom said, his voice matter-of-fact. "Not the bank account. He can't. You've got the hold in place. But he's shuffling the corporate structure. We need to subpoena the business records before he can bury anything deeper." The first direct evidence arrived 4 days later in the form of a bank document Tom obtained through a targeted discovery request, a wire transfer confirmation from September 14, 2021, showing $49 million wired from Henderson Development Group's primary business account to the joint savings account. The originating memo line read, "Proceeds, Orchard Street Portfolio Sale." The Orchard Street Portfolio. I recognized the name. It was a collection of commercial properties Daniel had been developing since 2017. He had mentioned the sale to me once, in the summer of 2021, over breakfast. He had said, casually, that it had been a disappointing deal, that the market conditions had forced him to sell below projections, and that the proceeds had barely covered the debt on the properties. The wire confirmation said otherwise. $49 million, into an account he would swear, under oath, held $2,400. I sat in Margaret's conference room with Tom and stared at that document for a very long time. This was no longer suspicion. This was no longer a woman with a legal pad trying to make sense of a number on a screen. This was evidence, documented, time-stamped, court-admissible evidence of deliberate financial fraud, and there was no going back from it. Margaret filed the motion to vacate the divorce settlement on a Monday morning in late March 2024. The document was 42 pages long, with the bank wire confirmation attached as Exhibit A. Tom Briggs's preliminary financial analysis was Exhibit B. 11 pages of trace transactions, business records, and timeline discrepancies that mapped, with clinical precision, exactly how Daniel Henderson had moved $55 million out of his company into a jointly titled account and then forgotten to mention it to a court. By that afternoon, Daniel's attorney, a man named Garrett Finch, known for being expensive and relentless, had received his copy. By that evening, Daniel had received his. I knew the moment he found out because my phone rang at 7:14 p.m. I let it ring. Then it rang again. Then a text message appeared. "Claire, call me. Now." I showed it to Margaret the next morning. She told me to keep not answering. But Daniel was not the kind of man who waited. He had not built a 40-story company by waiting. The following Thursday, I came home from the design firm to find his black Range Rover parked in front of my house. He was standing in my driveway, hands in the pockets of his overcoat, jaw set. Beside him, leaning against the passenger door with her arms crossed and her eyes steady, was Rachel Voss. I had seen Rachel perhaps a dozen times over the years, at company events, at Christmas parties, in the elevator of Daniel's building. She was tall, dark-haired, precise in a way that now read as deliberate concealment. She had a law degree in addition to her finance credentials. She had helped Daniel build his empire and, I now understood, helped him protect it from me. "We need to talk," Daniel said. His voice was controlled, but his jaw was working in the way it did when he was genuinely furious. "You can talk to my attorney," I said. "Claire." He stepped forward. "You don't understand what you're doing," What Olson is filing is going to drag our family through. You don't get to invoke the family, I said. Not after what you did. Rachel spoke for the first time, her voice smooth and measured. There are explanations for those transactions that your attorney hasn't accounted for. The Orchard Street proceeds were moved to that account temporarily as part of a tax restructuring arrangement. It was always intended to be disclosed at year-end, but the divorce timeline, you're going to want to stop there, I said. I was surprised by my own calm, because anything you say to me now will be documented and shared with my attorney. Rachel's eyes went flat. Daniel took a breath. We're prepared to offer you a revised settlement, he said. $2 million. Clean, immediate, no further litigation. You sign a full release and we all move forward. $2 million against 55. He was offering me less than 4 cents on the dollar for what the evidence already showed he owed me, and he was framing it as generosity. The audacity of it was almost beautiful in its way. The sheer, unbroken confidence of a man who had never once believed he would be held accountable. No, I said. Claire, no, and I'd like you to leave my property. The silence lasted approximately 4 seconds. Rachel put her hand on Daniel's arm. He shook it off, looked at me for a long moment with an expression I had learned over 22 years meant he was calculating rather than feeling, and then he walked back to the Range Rover. Rachel followed. They drove away without another word. I stood in my driveway until their taillights disappeared around the corner. Then I went inside, locked the front door, and sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets for exactly 3 minutes. Biscuit came and pressed his warm, heavy head into my lap. I put both hands on his fur and breathed. The next morning I called Margaret to report the encounter. She was direct. That offer tells us they know the evidence is bad for them. Don't respond to any further contact. Let everything come through counsel. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, You held your ground. Good. She was right that I had. But I was also exhausted in a way I hadn't anticipated, the kind of exhaustion that comes not from physical effort, but from the sustained intensity of fighting for yourself in a world that has spent years teaching you to be agreeable. The adrenaline that had carried me from the bank to the attorney's office to the courtroom filing had burned down to something rawer and quieter. Margaret herself suggested it. Take the weekend. Don't read the news. Don't check your email more than once. Go somewhere that isn't your house if you can. I drove up to Lake Geneva on a Friday afternoon and rented a small room at a lakeside inn I'd loved since my 20s. I walked along the water. I ate dinner alone at a table by the window and ordered the salmon and a glass of white wine and sat there in the gray spring light, watching the water and letting myself, very carefully, feel the full weight of what was happening. I had been cheated. I had been lied to by a man I had built my life beside. I had signed documents based on fraud and walked away with a fraction of what was mine. These were facts. They existed outside of my feelings about them, but I had also found it. I had gone to that bank on an ordinary Tuesday morning to close an old account, and instead I had found the evidence that would change everything. Was that luck? Providence? I didn't know. What I knew was that I had not run from it. I had not been bought off. I had stood in my driveway and said no to a man who had never heard that word from me in 22 years, and the sky had not fallen. I ordered dessert. I sat by the lake until it was dark, and on Sunday evening, I drove home ready. The softened approach came through Alan Marsh, which I should have expected. Alan was a mutual friend from the years of dinner parties and charity galas, Daniel's college roommate, a corporate attorney himself, the kind of careful man who smoothed things over for a living. He called me on a Wednesday evening, his voice warm with practiced neutrality. "Claire, I hope I'm not calling at a bad time." "What do you need, Alan?" A beat of practiced surprise. "I'm not calling on Daniel's behalf officially. I've heard things are getting complicated, and as someone who cares about both of you—" "Alan," I said, "please don't." He pressed on gently. Daniel, he explained, was worried about the children's emotional well-being. The litigation would be public, Emma and Jake would inevitably see coverage. The family name would be in the news. Daniel was prepared, Alan said carefully, to increase the settlement offer to $5 million. Confidential. No admission of wrongdoing. A resolution that would let everyone heal. $5 million. He doubled his offer in 2 weeks. That told me something important about how frightened they were. "Tell Daniel that his attorney should communicate with my attorney," I said. "That's the only conversation I'm interested in having. Good night, Alan." I hung up and sat quietly for a moment. Then I noticed that my hands were not shaking. I noticed that I had not felt the old pull, the familiar, deeply conditioned reflex to smooth things over, to find a middle ground, to make the discomfort stop by giving a little ground. That reflex had defined so much of my marriage. It had made me a pleasant dinner companion and a cooperative divorce defendant and a woman who signed 47 pages of financial disclosures without reading each line carefully enough. It was gone now, or not gone, quieted, held firmly in place by something that felt very much like self-respect. What the $5 million offer really confirmed was that Tom Briggs's analysis had been more damaging than even Margaret had estimated. The forensic accountant had now completed a fuller review, and the picture was considerably worse for Daniel than the first document had suggested. There were 2 additional accounts, one in Delaware, one routed through a Nevada shell company, that showed patterns consistent with asset concealment during the divorce period. Margaret had filed supplementary discovery requests. Daniel's legal team was spending enormous energy trying to contain the investigation's scope. That same week, I finally told Susan. She came over on a Thursday evening with takeout from the Thai place we'd been going to since our kids were in kindergarten together, and I sat her down at my kitchen table and told her everything, start to finish. The bank, the balance, the wire confirmation, the driveway confrontation, the $5 million offer I had declined. Susan was quiet for a long time. She is not by nature a quiet person. $55 million, she said finally. He put $55 million in an account with your name on it and then pretended it had 2,000 in it. Correct. And you've known this for about 5 weeks. She stared at me. Claire, how are you walking around? I almost laughed. One day at a time. She reached across the table and took both my hands. You are going to win this, she said, with a certainty that had nothing to do with legal strategy and everything to do with 30 years of friendship. You hear me? You are going to win. I called Amy the next morning. My sister lives in Denver, 3 years younger than me, and she has never once in her life liked Daniel Henderson. She said so, unprompted, at our wedding rehearsal dinner in 1999, and spent the next 22 years politely not saying so. When I told her what had happened, there was a silence that lasted exactly 2 seconds, and then she said, I'm booking a flight. You don't have to. I'm booking a flight. Amy arrived on a Saturday with a rolling suitcase, her running shoes, and a very specific kind of fierce sisterly energy that I had forgotten existed until it was standing in my living room rearranging my couch cushions and demanding to know if I'd been eating properly. She stayed for 10 days. She cooked. She made me walk with her every morning along the lake path in the neighborhood. She sat with me while I reviewed documents in the evenings and didn't pretend to understand the legal strategy, but understood perfectly when to hand me coffee and when to simply be there. It was Amy who said the thing that stayed with me. We were walking on a Sunday morning, cold spring air, the kind of pale early light that makes everything look slightly holy, and she said, "You know what the most frightening thing is for a man like Daniel? Not losing the money. He can make more money. The most frightening thing is realizing that the woman he underestimated for 22 years has better instincts than he thought." I thought about that for a long time. Daniel and Rachel, I understood, were watching, not approaching. Their attorneys had advised against further direct contact after the driveway incident, but watching through Alan Marsh, through mutual acquaintances, through whatever sources they had cultivated in the years of being the kind of couple that everyone wanted to know. They were waiting to see if I would tire, if I would take the money, if I would decide, as I had decided so many times before, that peace was worth the price they were asking. They were going to wait a long time. They came on a Saturday in May, 6 weeks after the motion to vacate had been filed. I was in the backyard deadheading the rose bushes my mother had planted the year before she died. The last things in my garden I treated with the particular care you give to things that belong to someone you've lost. When I heard the doorbell, I set down my gloves. I went to the front door. And there they were on my porch. Daniel in a camel overcoat, Rachel in a dark blazer, both of them arranged in an attitude of conciliation that was almost convincing. "We'd like to talk," Daniel said. "Just talk. No attorneys, no strategy, just people." I should have closed the door. I knew, on some level, exactly what this was. But I let them in. Not because I was naive, I was past naive, but because I wanted to watch. I wanted to see what their version of an olive branch looked like, because whatever they were about to do would tell me something useful about how frightened they had become. I let them sit in my living room. I did not offer coffee. I sat in the chair across from them and waited. Daniel began with the children. He was worried about Emma, he said. She was finishing her junior year. She had mentioned feeling stressed when she called him, and this legal situation was weighing on the whole family. He thought about Jake. He used the word family 4 times in the first minute, like a man who has been coached to use it and has forgotten that the coaching is visible. "Our children are adults," I said, "and they know their father hid money from their mother. Emma called me. Daniel. She called me." Something moved behind his eyes. Rachel leaned forward then. She had the poised, clinical quality of someone who had rehearsed this conversation and was now executing it with technical proficiency. "Claire," she said, and the warmth in her voice was impressive, genuinely impressive, the way a very good forgery is impressive. "I understand there's a lot of anger here. That's natural. But I want to be honest with you, woman to woman. What's driving this litigation is grief, the grief of a marriage ending, and there's no dollar amount that resolves grief. We think, and Daniel's therapist agrees, that this process is causing you more pain than it's healing." I looked at her. Daniel's therapist. The invocation of a therapist as a witness to my emotional instability. The reframing of a fraud lawsuit as the symptom of a woman who couldn't move on. It was, I had to admit, very elegantly done. "Rachel," I said, "you helped him route $49 million into an account he didn't disclose in his divorce filings. You knew. You managed those transfers. Your name is on the originating instructions in 3 of the 4 wire confirmations Tom Briggs pulled. I watched the color shift very slightly beneath her composed expression. "So when you sit in my house and talk to me about grief, I need you to understand that I see exactly what you are doing, and I need you to understand that it isn't working." The room went quiet. Daniel uncrossed his legs. He set both forearms on his knees, a posture I recognized from 22 years of watching him conduct difficult negotiations, and his voice dropped into the register he used when he wanted to be taken seriously. "You're going to lose," he said. "Garrett has found procedural issues with Olson's filing. We have accountants who will testify that those transfers had legitimate business purposes. We have the resources to litigate this for 5 years, Claire. 5 years. You'll spend everything you got in the settlement on attorney fees. And even if you win, the public process will be brutal. Your name in every financial news outlet in Illinois. Emma reading about it. Jake, is that worth it to you?" There it was. The threat stripped of its coat of olive branch. 5 years of litigation, ruinous legal fees, public humiliation, the children. I looked at him. I looked at the man I had loved at 24, had married at 25, had built a home with and raised children beside for over 2 decades. I looked at the particular way he was watching me, measuring, calculating, the same expression he'd had in the driveway, and I thought, he's never once in all these years believed I would not back down. "Get out of my house," I said. No raise in volume, no shake in my voice. "Claire, both of you, now." They left. Rachel's heels clicked across my hardwood floor with tight, precise steps. Daniel paused at the door. I don't know what he expected. Perhaps a last-second flinch, one final capitulation. And then he left too. I closed the front door. I turned the deadbolt. Then I stood in my hallway and let the fear come. Because it was there. It had been there all along, underneath the calm, underneath the resolve. The fear that he was right, that Garrett Finch's resources would outlast mine, that the litigation would consume years of my life and empty my accounts, that I would lose. The fear that I had looked at a number on a screen and convinced myself I deserved something I would never actually be given. I sat on the bottom stair and breathed through it, all of it. I didn't run from it or minimize it. And then something happened that I didn't expect. The fear didn't go away, but it changed. It compacted itself into something smaller and denser and less scattered. It stopped feeling like vertigo and started feeling like fuel. He had come to my house, and told me I would lose, and sat in my living room while his girlfriend told me my lawsuit was a symptom of grief and threatened me with 5 years and public humiliation because he was frightened, because Tom Briggs had found 3 wire confirmations with Rachel's name on them, because their position was not as solid as Garrett Finch's retainer suggested. I picked up my phone and called Margaret. "They came to the house," I said. "Rachel's directly implicated in the transfers. She knows it. He knows it. They're scared." "Tell me everything," said Margaret. And I did. The hearing was held on a Thursday in late June in a courtroom on the 17th floor of the Daly Center before Judge Miriam Ashworth. Judge Ashworth was in her late 50s, a woman who had spent 30 years watching people lie to her under oath and had developed, as a result, a particular quality of attention, very still, very complete, that made the air in her courtroom feel pressurized. She reviewed documents the way a surgeon reviews X-rays, not quickly and not for confirmation, but looking for the thing that doesn't belong. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside Margaret in a charcoal blazer I had bought for the occasion and not worn before that day. Daniel and Rachel sat at the defendant's table with Garrett Finch, a broad, silver-haired man with the bearing of someone accustomed to winning by attrition, and two junior associates who spent much of the morning taking careful notes. Tom Briggs testified first. He was 62, quiet, balding, with the precise diction of a man who understood that his job was to translate complexity into clarity. He walked the court through 4 months of forensic analysis, the timeline of the joint savings account, the wire transfers, the Henderson Development Group business records, the Delaware and Nevada corporate entities, the originating instructions on each transfer. He presented the September 2021 wire confirmation, $49 million from the Orchard Street portfolio sale. And then, with the methodical calm of someone laying cards face up on a table, he presented the 3 subsequent transfers totaling $6.2 million, each one bearing, in the originating memo field, a series of internal transfer codes that corresponded to Henderson Development Group's accounting system. And then he presented the emails. Margaret had obtained them through discovery. Internal correspondence between Daniel and Rachel from July through October of 2021. In a message dated July 22, 2021, hours, 5 days after Daniel's financial disclosures had been submitted to the court, Rachel had written, "Orchard proceeds routed per your instruction. Old account used as holder. Should be clean. Claire never checks it." The courtroom was very quiet. Daniel's jaw was set. He was looking at a point somewhere past Judge Ashworth's left shoulder. Garrett Finch's cross-examination of Tom lasted 90 minutes. He challenged the methodology, the chain of custody on the business records, the interpretation of the transfer codes. Tom answered each challenge with the same measured precision. He did not waver. He did not lose his place. At one point, Finch suggested that the use of the joint account could be interpreted as a business decision unrelated to the divorce proceedings, and Tom looked at him with the gentle patience of a teacher and said, "The account was used to hold marital assets during an active divorce proceeding, after financial disclosures had been submitted to the court, without notification to the opposing party or the court. I can't interpret that as incidental." I testified in the afternoon. I told the story simply. The marriage, the divorce, the settlement I had accepted based on the disclosures presented to me, the trip to the bank in February, the number on the screen. I described the driveway confrontation and the offer of $2 million. I described the subsequent offer of $5 million communicated through Alan Marsh. I described the visit to my home in May, and I described, with as much precision as I could recall, Rachel Voss telling me that my lawsuit was a symptom of grief rather than a legitimate legal claim. Finch cross-examined me for 40 minutes. He was skilled. He suggested I had been aware of the account's activity and had agreed, tacitly, to Daniel managing assets through it. He suggested the settlement had been fair given the information available at the time. He suggested I had been coached by Margaret to characterize normal business practice as misconduct. I answered every question directly. Yes, the account had been joint. No, I had never received any communication about funds being routed through it. Yes, I had signed the settlement, based on the disclosures presented to me. Had I trusted Daniel to be honest in those disclosures? Yes. Did I now? No. He tried a softer angle near the end. "Mrs. Henderson, is it possible that this lawsuit is, at least in part, about the end of a long marriage rather than a specific legal grievance?" I looked at him. Then I looked at Judge Ashworth. Then I looked back at Finch. The wire confirmation dated September 14, 2021, shows $49 million deposited into a jointly titled account that my ex-husband listed at $2,400 in his financial disclosures, I said. I'm not here because my marriage ended. I'm here because I was lied to in a courtroom. Finch sat down. Daniel took the stand in the late afternoon. He had prepared for this. I could see it in the way he settled into the witness chair, the way he arranged his hands, the practiced reasonableness in his expression. He had an explanation for the Orchard Street proceeds. They had been placed in the joint account as a temporary holding measure during a corporate restructuring, he said. He had intended to disclose the account at a later stage of the proceedings. The timeline was unfortunate, but not intentional. Margaret cross-examined him for 55 minutes. She began with the July 22nd email, Rachel's message stating, "Claire never checks it." She asked Daniel to characterize that phrase. It was informal language, he said. It meant the account was functionally inactive. Your CFO wrote in a business email about the routing of $49 million of corporate proceeds that your wife, Ealk, quote, never checks it. You're asking the court to read that as a comment about account activity levels. It was informal. Mr. Henderson, why did you not update your financial disclosures when the $49 million wire was received in September 2021? You had 2 months before the final settlement was signed. You had legal counsel. You knew the obligation to disclose existed. There was a miscommunication with my... Was there a miscommunication, or did you make a deliberate decision not to disclose? It was a process issue with Mr. Henderson. Margaret's voice was level and unhurried. I'm going to ask you one more time clearly. Did you know at the time you signed the final divorce settlement in November 2022 that this account held more than $55 million? Something shifted in Daniel's face. The composure, so carefully constructed, so practiced, developed a fracture along its edge. His eyes moved to Garrett Finch, who gave the smallest shake of his head. I was aware of the general, yes or no, Mr. Henderson. The silence lasted 5 full seconds. In a courtroom, 5 seconds is an eternity. I was aware, he said. Yes. Judge Ashworth wrote something on her notepad. She wrote for a long time. When she looked up, she looked first at me. I held her gaze. Whatever she saw there, a woman who had driven to a bank on an ordinary Tuesday found a number she wasn't supposed to find and decided not to pretend she hadn't. It seemed to satisfy some internal measurement she was making. She made one further note on her pad. Then she called a recess. Judge Ashworth issued her ruling 12 days later, on a Tuesday morning in July. Margaret and I sat at the plaintiff's table. Daniel and Garrett Finch sat across the room. Rachel was not present. Her own attorney had advised against it. The courtroom was quiet in the particular way of rooms where consequential things are about to be said. Judge Ashworth entered, settled, and began. She found that the divorce settlement of November 2022 had been obtained through fraud upon the court. Daniel Henderson had submitted materially false financial disclosures, concealing assets held in a jointly titled account. The $49 million wire transfer, combined with the internal email correspondence demonstrating deliberate non-disclosure, established the fraud with clear and convincing evidence. The settlement was vacated in its entirety. She applied Illinois' equitable distribution statute to the full picture: the joint savings account, the business assets of Henderson Development Group at their actual valuation, $31 million, nearly 30 times Daniel's declared figure, and the Delaware and Nevada entities. She awarded me 60% of the marital estate. In raw figures, approximately $47 million. Attorney's fees were to be borne by Daniel in full as a sanction for litigation misconduct. Then she addressed the July 22nd email. The correspondence between Mr. Henderson and Rachel Voss constitutes evidence of coordinated fraud involving a third party, Judge Ashworth said. This court is referring the matter to the Cook County State's Attorney's Office for review of potential criminal charges. Ms. Voss, as a licensed CPA, had a professional obligation that appears to have been materially compromised. The referral will include relevant documentation to the Illinois CPA Licensing Board. Daniel sat with his hands flat on the table, looking past the judge's bench. For the first time in 4 months, he looked genuinely at a loss. He had never believed I would find what I found, had never believed I would do what I did, had never believed a woman who spent 22 years being agreeable would one day stop. He had been wrong about all three. The gavel came down. Outside in the marble corridor, Margaret reviewed the paperwork while I looked out over the city, Millennium Park, the lake, the improbable blue of a July morning. 2.5 years ago, I had stood in this same building and taken the elevator down in silence after signing a settlement I believed was fair. Today, I let myself feel the full size of what had happened. The criminal referral could mean years of investigation, Margaret said. The CPA board referral could be career-ending for Rachel. Outside, a tour boat crossed the Chicago River in the July light, small, bright, moving steadily forward. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," Margaret said, "we collect." The money arrived in stages, the way real things do. I paid off the mortgage first. I set up education funds for Emma and Jake. I kept working at the design firm, reduced hours, a pro bono project at the Naperville Library, because I had discovered I genuinely loved it. In October, Susan and I finally took that trip to Portugal. On a cliff in Sintra above the Atlantic, she took a photograph of me squinting into the wind, and when I looked at it later, I thought, that's what coming through something looks like. Daniel was indicted in April 2025, 3 counts of perjury, 2 of fraudulent concealment. Rachel's CPA license was suspended in December 2024. Their relationship ended somewhere that winter. I received this news the way you receive news about strangers. Biscuit slept at the foot of my bed. The roses bloomed. Everything was mine, completely, legally, hard-won, mine. That was enough. Looking back, what I know is this. The truth does not disappear because someone hides it. It waits, patient and specific, in an account you almost didn't check, on a screen a bank manager almost didn't turn toward you. What changed my life was not luck. It was the decision, in that moment of shock, not to walk away. What would you have done in my place? I'd genuinely like to know. Leave a comment below. And if this story stayed with you, share it. Thank you for listening.